right now. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Scott Jackson. I am the executive director of Shakespeare at Notre Dame, as well as a co-founder of the Shakespeare in Prisons Network, along with Kurt Toffland, who disappeared from my view. He's lurking. Oh no, he is. He's got his video on. There he is, right there. And welcome to really the final Q&A session for 2020. We got a lot of stuff that I'll preview for you at the end of the session coming up in January. But right now we're here to talk to Ashley Lucas and this fabulous grouping of prison theater directors from literally around the world today that are all highlighted in Ashley's book, Prison Theater and the Global Crisis of Incarceration, that came out in September. Fantastic read. And I think now I will be quiet and I'll turn it over to Ashley. Take it away.
Thank you, Scott and Kurt and all of the other organizers of the Shakespeare in Prisons Conference. I am so honored to be here with this group of beautiful people today. My name is Ashley Lucas and I teach theater at the University of Michigan, and I work there with the Prison Creative Arts Project. And for the last 7 years or so, I was doing research by going around to as many prison theater programs as I could in as many countries in the world as I could get to. So I made it to 10 different countries and met a whole bunch of beautiful people throughout the US and many other places who are doing beautiful work in theater in prisons. And I was really grateful that I had finished all of my research travels before the world stopped making it safe to travel. And as a result, the people who are here on this panel today are folks that I met in those journeys who are all doing work that I deeply, deeply admire in difficult places, in prisons throughout the world. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves to you. If you didn't get a chance to see our earlier panel, then I want you to have a chance to meet now our distinguished guests who are here today. So I'm going to ask Kate Rubin from Canada to chime in and introduce herself and the program with which she works.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. It's kind of midday here in Victoria, BC, Canada. So that's where I am. And I'm a theater artist, a teacher, director, facilitator, and I work with a cohort of people with William Head on Stage, which is a almost 40-year-old theater company in a men's prison right near Victoria, BC. And I've been doing the work myself for about 15 years, and there's a large collective of us who work with the men inside and out. So that's me.
Thank you, Kate. And I hope the copies of the book that we sent to the men at William Head have arrived. Have they? Are they there? Woohoo! Part of my mission in this work is to give the book back to as many people in prison as possible. And I'm anxiously awaiting to hear if everybody got the book. So that's really great news. Thank you, Kate. Frannie, would you tell us who you are and where you are and who you work with?
Yes, hello. I'm Frannie Shepherd-Bates, and I am the director of Shakespeare in Prison, which is part of Detroit Public Theater in Michigan. And for the past 8.5 years, we've been working with folks who are incarcerated in Michigan. And then for the past 2.5 years with alumni of our program after they've gone home. We've worked mostly with women, but also with men and with youth. And so we use Shakespeare not just for, performance, but also as a catalyst for empowerment. So sometimes we'll say like, it's not actually about the Shakespeare. And in many ways it's not. And then after folks come home, we're working on them sometimes on projects that are more artistic and often on more general kind of mentoring, professionally, personally, whatever. And yeah, we're making a book. We do all sorts of things. Even right now, while we can't be in the prisons, we're still super busy and connecting and engaging however we can.
So glad to hear it and happy to have you here, Frannie. Thank you. Viviane, would you introduce yourself and tell us where you are and what you do?
My name is Viviane Narvaes, and I am a professor at Universidade Federal do Estado do Rio de Janeiro. So I am in Brazil. I coordinate with a partnership with Professora Natalia Ribeiro Fish, a program called Culture in the Prisons. And also I'm a theater director. I directed the play called Show Me the Way Out. So this is I am.
Yes, so Viviane's work appears in two different chapters in the book. Her work with the program Teatro na Prisão takes students from Rio de Janeiro from the Federal University into prisons. And she also works with a program through the same group of folks, working with people who have come home from prison and who are in what they call open prisons in Brazil, where people can come out during the day and go back into the prison at night. And they've been doing some incredible theater there. And the play Show Me the Way Out that she references is described in detail in the conclusion of the book. Miranda.
Thanks, Ashley.
You're welcome. We're so happy to have you here, Vivi. Obrigada. Miranda, would you tell us who you are and what you do?
Hi, everyone. My name is Miranda Young-Jahangeer, and I'm speaking to you from Durban, which is on the east coast of South Africa. It's just after 10 at night. I work at a university called the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and for the past 20 years, I've been running a prison theatre project in a prison called Westville Female Correctional Centre. The project originally started in a number of prisons, but the surviving one is in the female centre. And we basically use theatre to create spaces for conversation with the women in the prison. And it's run with students. Students come in and we do this kind of participatory theatre with the women inside.
And it's beautiful work, Miranda. We're so glad you're here tonight.
Thanks.
Johnny, would you tell us who you are and where you are and who you work with?
I'm Johnny Stallings. I'm in Portland, Oregon. And for a number of years, I worked with Open Hearts, Open Minds in prisons in Oregon, directing plays, mostly by Shakespeare. Currently, the executive director of Open Hearts, Open Minds is on our screen right now, Carla Grant. And she is carrying the prison theater programs forward in Oregon.
Thank you, Johnny and Carla. Thank you for being here. Maud, would you tell us who you are? And I think somebody affiliated with your program is on this call today too.
I know, it's so lovely to see Katie. Hello, hello. Such a long way away. I'm working with Somebody's Daughter Theatre. We're in Victoria, Australia. And we basically do create a new work in the prison and a big art exhibition every year. There's a core group of artists that do that, and we do it because we love the arts. So it's about having the opportunity to create new Australian devised work, which is fantastic for us as artists because it's work with meaning. The work that's produced is wonderful, has huge impact, not only within the prison, but on all of the audience that comes in, and a lot of those are the policymakers, et cetera, et cetera. One of the most important things I think about the work, though, is that the families of women are often, most times, able to come in, and it's one of the only times that there's real, like normal contact, if you like, where people can, instead of being in the visit centre. So that's been going for a very long time. And Somebody's Daughter also works in regional, mainly in Victoria, but around Australia, with particularly with kids at risk. And we just love the work. And I'm up in the country with my family, and we had a huge night last night. So I'm still waking up, just to let you know.
Well, we're grateful that you woke up and joined us, Maud. Thank you.
I'm not really sure what's going to come out of my mouth. I hope it's okay.
All the better. You're among family here with theater folks.
Good.
We love whatever's going to come out of your mouth.
Good.
And Katie Langford, who was a part of your theater company with Somebody's Daughter, is joining us from London. So I just want to say, hey, Katie.
Hi, Ashley. Hi, Maud. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here and seeing you all from all over the world. It's amazing.
Beautiful, beautiful performer, beautiful actress, beautiful.
Thank you.
Very true, very true. So we're excited to open up this conversation to all of you who have joined us here today. I think one of the most interesting things that I learned in having the honor of getting to see all of these programs was to really witness how the culture of theater making in different countries really influences how prison theater happens, and also how a nation views the arts and what the arts mean. It has a lot to do with how people get funded, how people get access to prisons, and the specific cultures of people within the prison also become a huge part of the work. So when I visited somebody's daughter, I saw people who were making theater that referenced cultures from all over the world, because there were so many different kinds of immigrants in that cast and people who'd been locked up in Australia from all over the world. A lot of Miranda's work with the women in South Africa takes place in the isiZulu language, because that is the language spoken by most of the women in the prison, even though it's not Miranda's dominant language. And folks like Kate and Maud are able to apply for national funding from their country's governments to support their work, where we don't have that much of that in the United States. So all of these different cultural influences really affect how the work happens. In Brazil, for instance, you can hug people in prison and touch them in ways that are not possible in the United States. So Viviane and I have had a lot of conversations about how physical touch affects the kind of theater work that we do in the prisons. So I wanted to primarily give space for those of you who have come to join us today to ask questions of this amazing group of people from all over the world. But I also am happy to get the ball rolling by asking some questions directly, just to get the conversation started. But if you feel like you want to ask something, you can certainly put it in the chat, or just say in the chat, hey, I'd like to ask a question now, or make a comment, and we can invite you to ask the question in your own voice and turn your camera and microphone on, or we can ask the question for you if you don't feel comfortable doing that. So feel free to jump in at any time. But I thought I'd start by asking Frannie and Johnny, because you both do Shakespeare, but it looks pretty different when each of your companies is doing this work. Why is Shakespeare, since we are here at the Shakespeare in Prisons conference, something that you have been committed to doing in prisons? Why Shakespeare specifically?
I guess like we started with Shakespeare because that's what I felt like I knew how to do. And the way that, because I started our program with no other facilitators, it was just me and this group of women at the prison. And I felt like where I'm strongest in theater is Shakespeare. So that's how I could best facilitate a program. And then as we worked on it more, it became like this is for them, like, this is what we do. This is our, this is how we make culture here. And we really enjoy, not like Shakespeare's the most cultured, but this is our piece of it right here. This ensemble is that we are doing Shakespeare together, and that we really take great pride in doing something that is so, it seems like one of our ensemble members, one of our alums said recently that like, it seems impossible. So when you do something that seems impossible, then it makes everything else seem possible. And then you don't want to stop doing the impossible thing. So I think that's why we keep, because if the ensemble felt really, because everything we do is so collaborative, if they felt really strongly that we should do something other than Shakespeare, then I'd be like, okay, I don't know what to do about the name of our program, but let's see what we can do, but it would be like, that's where we started. It works for us. But it's, it's always a choice, and we just kind of collectively keep coming back to making that same choice. That it's not just that like a lot of us love the language, or some people don't even feel that strongly about the language. They just feel like they can get at things that they approach it from their own lives and really draw more out of that than they do out of other forms of literature or theater that they may or may not have tried. So I think those are, I think if I just spoke coherently at all, I think that's kind of why, maybe.
Thank you, Frannie. I do think that was coherent. Don't worry about it. Johnny, same question.
Frannie, I'll just say that the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, which has been around for a really long time, for many, many years, all they did was Shakespeare plays, but for several decades, they've mixed in a lot of other things, but they didn't change their name. So I think you're good there. And I'll also say that Open Hearts, Open Minds devised theater at the women's prison that Carla has directed a lot of devised shows at Coffee Creek Women's Prison, as well as doing 12th Night there. But I live a long way from Two Rivers Prison. It's a 3-hour drive each way. And I could only go out once a week when I was doing it. And so it took 6 months to direct a play. And for me, like, I'd rather spend 6 months on a Shakespeare play than on something that doesn't have that much in it. And I don't know, there's so many ways that doing Shakespeare enriches the lives of the actors. And as Frannie was kind of suggesting, it's when they do that and they say, I played Hamlet, they really feel great about themselves. They've really taken on the impossible challenge. It has a reputation of being really, really difficult. But my actors have said that actually it was easier to do Shakespeare plays than something like 12 Angry Men because of the language, the rhythm, you could learn the lines easier because it's just easier, stays in your head better. But really, Shakespeare's the depth of his plays is what makes them my top choice.
Thank you, Johnny. Frannie, did you want to chime in with one more thought?
Yes, I forgot to mention one of the things that our ensemble members bring up a lot, that the part of the why Shakespeare is because we spend several months really just like discussing the plays and like kind of testing them on their feet, is that the language gives them a really good filter to talk about the, capital letters, the big things, that not just themes, but situations and characters and people and things where folks want to talk through things, but they don't necessarily want to tell their own stories quite yet, or they're not yet ready to talk in first person. But by talking through the characters and with language that is not the way that they would tell their own stories, like they wouldn't use that wording, it gives them, like, I like to think of it as like, rather than like a completely open window or a completely closed glass window, like kind of like the screen, so that there's they feel a little bit of protection there, but they're still able to participate. They just really might not have been ready to do that otherwise.
Thank you, Frannie. Vivi, I wanted to ask you about how Teatro na Prisão has done Shakespeare as well, and why you would have chosen to do the Romeo and Juliet production that I wrote about in the book, but also what it meant to you that the women took ownership of Romeo and Juliet and changed the ending.
We decided work with Shakespeare's play because the university of the themes, like love and other stuffs, but in first place, because most of the women incarcerated here in Rio de Janeiro was in prison because they love someone and get involved with the drug dealers and ends in prison. So we think work with Romeo and Julieta help me, Ashley, permitted
you, yeah.
Permitted us to get close,
yes,
with the women. I think it's that. This is the reason we choose Shakespeare play. But they change everything because most of them couldn't read, so we have to tell in a way. Romeo do that something. We have to tell the stories, and this is the way which the woman get close to the play, and they choose change the end of a play, because they said to us, it's enough of sadness. I don't know if it's clear, but
Yes.
they don't want to leave another tragic end. So they choose the happiness, and the place and in a baile funky. I don't know how to translate that,
Yes.
but it's in a favelas dance and a favelas party with Romeo and Juliet keeping together and happy. I think
Yes,
it's that.
it was beautiful to watch. I got to see this production in 2013 when I first visited Teatro na Prisão in Rio de Janeiro, and they told the story to the women in chronological order and had them improvise the lines. So they would give them all the characters' names and the plot of what was happening, and then the women would act it out, and they grew attached to the characters as they learned the play in the order of the scenes that Shakespeare wrote. And when they got to the end and the lovers committed suicide, the women they had totally protested Shakespeare's ending. They didn't care that Shakespeare had written it that way. They thought he was wrong, and that these young people needed the chance to live and survive, and that they, as women in prison, needed the chance to live a happy ending. And so it was a very pivotal and inspirational moment for me to see what you all did in that production. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley.
Kate, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the devising process that you all have at Who's. You've done plays that were scripted and plays that are original work, but you have such a fascinating process both on the end of bringing together the resources that you and the incarcerated men. The William Head on Stage Company in Canada is the only place where I encountered incarcerated people who were involved in the grant writing process to raise funding to hire professional artists like Kate to work with them inside. So Who's actually has an incarcerated board of directors and a really fascinating structure for how you get productions off the ground and how you choose what happens next. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that process, Kate.
Yeah, the devising process has been happening for about 11, 12 years now. We were doing Who's was primarily doing scripted work for many, many years, including numerous Shakespeare pieces. In fact, that's how I got involved. I was in the Scottish play as first witch, and that's how I first got out there and got the bug and became passionate about the work. But in the last 12 years or so, there's been a collaborative of us who have felt really strongly, because we have such a incredible diversity. We have an incredible diversity of men in the prison from many different cultures and a large Indigenous population. And that oftentimes when we were doing scripted work, they didn't come into the room at all. And so that was really hard to engage. And even though I have worked with Shakespeare and I've worked with lots of scripted material in my life, it was like, how do we tell stories that really are voicing as many different cultures and ways of being that we can? So that's how the devising began. And the number of us have had a lot of experience in devising plays. And the process is that there's like an hour and a half show that gets put towards a live audience, and there's people that actually come into the jail, paying public comes for 5 weeks. It's quite phenomenal and unique that people pay tickets to come to the theater. And the men manage it through a board, and there is a process of discussion with who they would like to come in to work with them. And so they will engage us about who might direct, who is going to help them build a vision. So there is this ongoing, I would say, collaborative thing that has been developing over the last 12 years with not only the men, but the administration obviously is key to this happening, to promote the trust that we can continue to build and expand the work that we're doing. And up until last year, the productions have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. There's over 30 men often involved in some context, not just like behind the scenes, and so we're also mentoring them with stage management, lighting tech, anything we can do, anything that they are showing interest in, we'll try to provide that. And we're really doing our best to just listen, I would say. And Kathleen, if you want to jump in at any point to add that, I mean, Kathleen's also been very helpful around many different aspects, but in terms of the grant writing is a big thing in Canada for receiving national grants to work. And we are very thankful to have the Canada Council for the Arts, which has been very supportive. And the CRD as well, our regional district. So that's one of the ways that we're able to afford to sort of build the capacity there, and also with the ticket prices that goes in. And the men give a portion of the ticket price to a charity every year. That's the other aspect of it. They choose a charity in the local area to give. So, and that's their call of how they want to do that.
Yeah, it's really amazing work, Kate, and it's stunning that I believe that the William Head on Stage program is the oldest prison theater company in North America, the oldest continually running one that I found anyway, and one of the oldest in the world. And the fact that the men have really been running it from inside the walls in many ways, in partnership with you and others like Kathleen outside, is an absolute feat of administrative glory. It's a miracle that it works.
It is a miracle that, because it's probably gone through half a dozen wardens who all supported it. And we've had the politics here in Canada that at times, like those of you in the States, it's gotten to a point where we sometimes just are like, please, 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 because it's very vulnerable. But so far, we're okay. I think Maude, you had said that you've been going for 40 years, somebody's daughter. Is that not true? Yeah. So that's 40 years right there, those two companies. Yeah.
Yeah, and Maude, you have a similar relationship in terms of government funding. The Australia Council has been supportive of somebody's daughter's work, but I know you've expressed similar thoughts to what Kate just said about feeling vulnerable about whether that support would continue. Would you talk a little bit about how your project's been supported and the kind of devising work that you all do, which is really masterful and amazing to watch?
Well, we're really privileged because we all just love it. That's what our expertise is, I suppose. But the arts are very vulnerable at this point in time. The federal government has taken, like 6 years ago, I think it was $125 million from the Australia Council. And since that time, it's been very precarious. And the last lot of grants saw us, as well as a number of other much more, they're not mainstream, but they're mainstream in terms of middle class audiences losing their funding, which was devastating. But since then, the Australian government also has through federal, not through the Australia Council, which is supposed to be arm's length from government, but politics, have started other streams. So we were fortunate to get some of that. It's precarious. And the only reason that we have survived is because of the quality of the work. And the only reason that we have survived through, because I find it interesting when you're talking about changing people that are running the prison, we've had very, very difficult times. We've had one time, I remember, when it was at Fairley Prison, where there was one governor that just wanted to get rid of us at all costs, and another governor that was standing up for us. So it's so much dependent upon your relationship with management. So it's always been, because when we first went into the prison, and I always say this is really, really important, I was in a show from the Victorian College of the Arts. We took it into the prison, and one of the women asked us to do drama. So it was the community itself that asked us to go in. So our responsibility, we always say, is to the community of women, not to management. We weren't brought in by management. And at the same time, there has to be a respect for management. So it's very, and I think it's a line, hopefully, that we've trod really well. The relationship we have with management at the moment is fantastic. Even with the last lot of funding which we lost, you had the Minister for Justice in Victoria who was really, really going into bat for us. And I know at a federal level that was happening as well, which is great. But it's precarious. And I think there's been so many times when it would have been easier to let everything go, except, and this is where it becomes a bit cosmic. My feeling has always been for as long as it's meant to continue, it will. And always at the last minute, something pops up, and it can be from left field. You've got no understanding of where that has come from, or you've got no understanding of the impact of something that was done 5 years ago that is kind of coming back to say thank you, which is quite beautiful. And the other thing I think that is so important is it's such a privilege for us to be working in such an environment where you've got such truth and open heart and passion. And it's just, that's what's inspiring. So, and the funding, energy follows energy. So, it's great that we have the funding here, but I don't know, it's not easy. It's a continual battle.
Thank you, Maude. Everything that you've said really resonates, especially about the privilege of getting to work in a place where people are so honest and open
and talented.
And incredibly talented.
When I was at the VCA and we went in and we're doing workshops, and you go in and you think, and then you realize that everybody standing in the circle would probably, if they auditioned, would have a place at the college. There's so much talent because there's a fearlessness. There's this, and, for an actor, it's all about truth. And you've got that in bucketfuls. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge Katie's comment about that in the chat. It was really incredible to get to see when Katie was inside working with somebody's daughter, her fearlessness and her talent that she brought to all of that work. So thank you for that, Katie, and thank you for being with us today. I also want to, go ahead. Yeah, Maude.
Katie, this is what happens. You've got this incredible woman who has trained as an actor in London, in the prison. So in terms of what she was able to bring, not only to the group, but to us, it was amazing, that level of not only talent, but honed talent. Katie's skills were so honed. And it was just brilliant. And it just shows you the randomness. It's, all of the stuff. And that's but so much of working in this environment is about breaking down and coming to grips with your own prejudice and, seeing the world differently. And Katie was a classic example of that. So we were so privileged again. And it was beautiful. Nothing that you could ever have maneuvered. And it just happened. So thank you, Katie. We love you.
Yes, I second all of that. We love you, Katie, and we're so glad that you're here. And it just fills me with such joy to see you in freedom. I also want to acknowledge Miranda's comment earlier in the chat, her question actually, about how people in the United States, and I think probably in other countries too, receive Shakespeare. I've heard colleagues in England, in the UK, talk about, particularly in Northern Ireland, how difficult the Shakespeare work can be because they feel like it belongs to the upper classes in a certain way. And so folks in prison have a certain level of resistance to it. And your work is so inspiring, Miranda, because you've used so much of the Zulu traditions, their circles and their storytelling and language in the work that you do. And because your work is always driven by the urgent needs of the women inside, as far as I've been able to observe, that they're actually trying to change the world in which they live and sometimes succeed to a remarkable degree. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that process and then frame your question about Shakespeare for other members of the panel.
Sure, yeah. So I guess it's also about telling a story of the beginning, and there are many intersections with the work of others on the panel. It was also sort of initiated by the inside. There was a young guy who'd actually done drama at Mao University, and he requested that we come in, and it started that way. But we have a history in South Africa of, we call it workshop theatre, workshopping, which is the same as devising. But it was also at a particular historical moment. In 2000, we were right at the beginning of the sort of democracy of South Africa as a democracy. So the prisons also were receptive to people coming in, because obviously anything like this was completely not heard of under apartheid legislation. So, and with the most famous prisoner of all being Nelson Mandela, the prisons were, were kind of one of the first major sort of governmental institutions to transform, and they wanted to do that fast, and they wanted to get rehabilitation or recreational programs into the prisons. So that's how we got in. But it was also about realizing a need to create a space for conversations and also for a kind of cultural transformation. So the prisons had always been very dominated by white Afrikaners because under apartheid, sort of working class Afrikaners were protected. So we had protected employment. And so the prisons were dominated by kind of working class Afrikaans South Africans. And that sort of needed to change. And the theatre helped to do that, because suddenly you had, the halls filled with struggle songs and dances and rhythms and drumming that just echoed everywhere. And it started a movement. It was about a kind of a reclaiming. It was about, or not a reclaiming, a claiming, it had never been. I mean, the prison that I work in was the old white prison. People were segregated as prisoners as well. So it was really about sort of shifting that space. And the theatre became a very important part of that kind of transformation. And then as the country has developed and gone through different stages, it has had to respond, because it is a responsive kind of theatre. So we go in and say, what do you want to make theatre about? What do you want to talk about? What do we need to do? And it comes. And, we've moved through various phases of looking at identity and looking at, questioning democracy and all kinds of things. And we're lucky. We've also had struggles with we call them members and head of prisons. And every year, you never know, are you going to get somebody at the other end who's going to make it difficult for you? And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. But we've been successful every year until this year, which the year we will not mention. And that's where we are. We keep going, and hopefully we'll be back on next year. And the question about Shakespeare, not to hold court too long, but Kurt was engaging me on a panel that they're going to be having in January, which is looking at kind of similar issues. And obviously, South Africa is majority not English speaking, but Shakespeare was kind of shoved down everybody's throat, and it just has such it just makes people feel stupid. So there is a resistance to it, not because of anything intrinsically about Shakespeare, which is fantastic in itself, but because of what it symbolizes. And it's obviously the sort of colonial canon, and we are a colonized country, so it's got all of these kind of connotations. But saying that, we do interesting work with students, and most of my students are Black South Africans, and they speak Zulu as a first language. So, and it's mostly very much what Viviane was saying, with the kind of the workshopping and the redevising it and turning it into sort of hip hop style, messing with the text and relocating it into, sort of into a township space or an urban space, and making it contemporary and relevant. And then it's fantastic. And but as it sits in that sort of stuck style of dense English and poetic language, which we probably also love, but it has these associations which are very difficult to overcome.
I'd like to sort of pitch this part of the conversation to Frannie, because she's been working in partnership with currently and formerly incarcerated people who've done Shakespeare to do a kind of annotated publication of, are you starting with Richard III? And
yeah,
yes,
yeah. No, actually, you'll all have the opportunity to see some members of that team, some of those contributors in a panel coming up at some point, which is really exciting. But yeah, I think one of the big things for us has always been to kind of, I'm not sure exactly where to start, but to say, like, there's no reason for this to have. Let me start over. This is something that is like such a big thing, because we don't go in and we don't teach, and we very specifically say we're not here to teach you or tell you what to think. And like, it's really great to have at our disposal all these, like, you know, centuries worth of analysis, but like, we're way more interested in the analysis of the people in the room, which is part of why we spend, you know, our discussion of the text that goes on for like 3 months before we even cast the play. We'll really get into like, what are your interpretations here? And it will go into like, you know, emotional places for sure, but it's also, a lot of our ensemble members are like secret nerds. Like they're such secret nerds, they didn't even know that they were nerds. And so we'll get into these like really heady discussions, and I'm like, oh my God, that is so in the text. I've never heard that anywhere before. It's amazing. And so we start, and that's a big part of our process, is to say, like, this doesn't belong to anyone in particular. Like, this belongs to everyone. It belongs to you. Like, you're not too stupid. Don't leave, stay 20 minutes. You'll probably like it better in 20 minutes. And so in making this book together, the idea is to put together a critical edition of Richard III that will look the same as any other critical edition of Shakespeare, but where all of the analysis will be verbatim from members of our ensemble who worked on Richard III a few years ago, and then alumni of that ensemble who have spent the last year and a half going through the play again. And so that's the idea, is to not only, you know, to break down the barriers that go in any direction, and say this material is for everyone, and everyone should have the opportunity to get their ideas out there about the material. And we also, like, as part of that play, in terms of, you know, making it more, I hate the word accessible, but to give us more of an into it, is we took that scene in Richard III where the ghosts come to Richard, and like, one of them will go to Richard and say, you killed everyone and I don't like you anymore and you should die. And then they go over to Richmond and they're like, you're awesome and you should win the battle. That it happens over and over. And we were like, we hate this scene so much. And I was like, all right, well, let's do something. Do you want to cut it? Do you want to do something with it? And we ended up adapting it. So we're using all Shakespeare's language, but we pared it down to like the language that meant the most to us, what we felt the scene meant within our telling of the story. And so we reworked it and restaged it. And then we recently took that adaptation and readapted it to put on video with 9 women, all in different places with different electronic devices, sending in clips and editing it into something that like honors that interpretation and also honors where we're at now. So I think we weren't even thinking of it as being Shakespeare at a certain point, but all the words were Shakespeare's. It just didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to like our ensemble.
Yeah, and that feels very aligned to me with what Viviane had started saying earlier about the women feeling close to the experience that Romeo and Juliet were having, because a lot of them were in prison. The majority of women in that cast were in prison because of something that had to do with a man that they were involved with, and that being involved with someone you love can also make you a casualty of gang warfare, which is a problem that a lot of people in Brazil have had to deal with. And they too took the story and made it their own by changing the ending and saying, we're not just going to be casualties of this war, we're going to live and thrive. So I also want to leave space for folks who here who have come in the audience to ask things. Carla, did you want to jump in to make the comment that you just typed?
Well, just along those lines of like Shakespeare being canon, like we literally were told, like, you can't do any content at one point. You can't do any content that had sex or violence or drugs and And I swear the very next email was, why don't you do Shakespeare? I'm not doing Shakespeare. But then we did Shakespeare at the women's prison. But anyway, I just think it's funny. I just think it's funny that Shakespeare does go and direct, and he goes for the sex and the violence and shows how shame turns into violence, turns into, like, and because it's canon, the officials let it happen. So, so it's kind of like a nice in, not that it's not the thing that I concern myself with so much, but it's a nice in, and then allowing the participants to make it their own, sorry, my language. But just to echo what Frannie was saying as well, and Miranda, I think all of you are new faces for me, but letting the folks claim it as their own is just brilliant. It's just lovely, and it makes me laugh because of the turning it on its head.
I have to say that my favorite story about theater being allowed in prison because of canon, it was a production that didn't actually end up happening for funding reasons. But when I went to Uruguay, to visit a prison theater program that was trying to get started, that hadn't actually gotten on its feet yet, the people who wanted to go in and do theater wanted to do it at a very high professional level. And so they were trying to do all this fundraising for a production of Animal Farm. And in Spanish, the accepted translation of the title of Animal Farm is Rebelde en la Granja, which is like rebellion in the barnyard. And I just loved the fact that not only was Orwell, who is trying to subvert government in all these different ways, such canon that they weren't going to mess with it, but they could actually get away with doing a play that had rebellion in the title. And it was for these very same reasons that prison authorities tend to ignore the violence and the lewd jokes and all of the things in Shakespeare that they wouldn't allow you to do in any other play, because Orwell was so well accepted, which I have not yet heard that people allowed Orwell to be performed in an English-speaking prison. So that's very interesting. Johnny, did you want to throw in something to this Shakespeare conversation?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing while we're all gathered here together, and that is that my own experience doing theater in prison, the most important dimension of it was the love dimension. And I'm sure that everybody who's worked in prison as a volunteer has experienced that. And with our program, we didn't just kind of know it in our hearts that we were having this big thing happening. We actually talked about it, and we and so if you go to a Shakespeare play at Two Rivers Prison, and the dialogue that follows between the audience and the actors are all going to be talking about love. They talk about it a lot, right there in prison in front of everybody. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Jake Merriman, who's somewhere among us in a rectangle with his name on it. He is currently the person who directs the Shakespeare plays at Two Rivers Prison. And like Carla, Jake is a big-hearted guy, a loving guy who brings the most essential quality to his productions, which is everybody in the cast loves him, and he loves every one of them. And that's actually one of the things that a Shakespeare play needs to be alive, is to have all this love in it. If it doesn't have that, it could be very technically impressive, but it wouldn't have that kind of profound impact that it's supposed to have. So anyway, I want to acknowledge Jake and honor his big heart, and Carla, same thing. They really are carrying that tradition forward, so I'm very pleased with that part.
That's beautiful, Johnny. And that was definitely a theme that I saw running throughout all of the prison theater companies that are represented here, that there is so much love among the people in the, not just in the cast and in the set of volunteers coming into the prison, but with the audiences, both the incarcerated audiences and on the occasions when people from the free world get to come inside. There's this kind of love connection, if you will, that binds people together, because something about the prison itself really raises the stakes of how precious each moment that we have together really is. Everybody knows that it could be taken away from you at any time. And watching you all in the production of A Winter's Tale that I got to see at Open Hearts, Open Minds talk about love so openly was really one of the defining experiences of this research for me, to see people in a prison able to discuss love in front of the prison authorities. It was just such a beautiful way for people to come together and be able to say those things, because there are a lot of other prisons that I've been in where you can't get away with saying that you love the people in the room with you as a volunteer to incarcerated people. They'll get you thrown out for overfamiliarity in Michigan, among other places. So to see that happening in Oregon and what it really did for the cast was a great, great joy for me.
Crazy idea that you could do theater without having you could have overfamiliarity.
It's a hard one. It's a really hard one, because the theater asks us to give so much of ourselves and to open up and share and become vulnerable as a place where we can grow and be a part of one another. And yet the prison is a place that wants to shut a lot of those things down. So it's an inherent contradiction, but one that can produce beautiful results.
Well, and just to say one more thing, I mean, that's why it's all the more needed there in prison. I think that's where it's a kind of a love desert, and so that's, why it must be nurtured,
Absolutely. Well, folks, I think we are at time today to end our session. And I'm just so grateful for everybody being here. It's really a dream come true for me to get to put all of these beautiful people who are doing such incredible work all over the world, both those of you on the panel and those of you in the audience today, to bring these folks together in the same room is something very, very meaningful for me, because not only COVID, which seems like the obvious thing at the moment, but our geography and the prisons themselves often really divide us from one another. So I greatly value this moment to come together with everybody here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand it back to Scott Jackson.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And congratulations again on a fantastic book. And congratulations to everyone who joined us today. Like, the work's inspiring, and it doesn't quite matter where you go in the world. We're all creating that change, one relationship at a time. So thank you all for all the work that you do.